Fanfic Corner, presented by Jennifer. The Boy with the Moon Rune Tattoo. Chapter 3. Mysticism and Divination, Part 1. Okay, for those of you who have not yet seen the first few videos for The Boy with the Moon Rune Tattoo, I suggest you go view those now, as this is a continuation of that story. The cooks are freaking out, Atlas was saying the next day at lunch. Callum put his tray down and sat across from him, listening carefully. What do you mean? Cale asked, sipping from a bottle of golden sunberry juice. He was lounging on the table's bench casually, but he moved when Cassandra approached, shooting him a disapproving look. Apparently, Zell interjected in her scholarly voice, without looking up from her own textbook, someone broke in last night and stole half a batch of jelly tarts. One of the cooks even got punched in the throat. Callum's stomach rumbled tenderously, and he hoped that none of the others had heard it. He and Ezrin had gorged themselves on the jelly tarts the night before, trying his best to get rid of the evidence. They still had plenty left over. Ezrin and Bate had fallen asleep in a small pile of the pastries. It would have been cute if it wasn't also incriminating. At least Callum didn't have to worry about smuggling more food to him. Wow, Callum, isn't that strange? Rayla said, crossing her arms and leaning back in her seat as she sent him a knowing look. She had a smug, almost gloating look in her violet eyes, and Callum could read the underlying message clear enough. I knew you were up to something. Callum shifted guiltily, but he still signed. I have no idea what you're talking about. It could have been worse, he told himself, as Rayla interpreted his words for the others. At least no one other than her had seen their faces, and despite her subtle teasing, he doubted she would tell anyone with authority about their excursion the night before. Although his chest still hurt from where the Sunfire Elf had tackled him. Yeah, Atlas said with a grin, lifting Callum's backpack. That's why you have jam on the inside of your pack. Callum's eyes nearly popped out of his head at the sight of the red jelly coating the inside of his bag. When had they stolen that from him? He had just sat down. As his face reddened, he caught the Moon Shadow Owls at the table sharing a conspicuous look. He sighed deeply. Was it really that obvious? He asked them. Cassandra sent one of those disapproving looks his way. He quickly realized over the last week she was very good at giving those. Almost as good as his own mother had been. His heart gave a little twang. You couldn't have been more obvious, Cassandra said. You have a little smudge of jelly right here. She gestured to the upper corner of her mouth. Horrified, Callum lifted his hand to find that she was right. How many others had guessed that he had been part of the heist last night? If he wasn't careful, he could lead them right to Ezran. Don't worry, Callum, Rayla said, uncorking her moonberry juice. It seemed to be the only thing she drank. I haven't told anyone. Well, at least that was a comfort. She didn't seem to be too curious about Ezran, not openly at least, which lifted a massive weight off Callum's shoulders. Besides, Cal added, it's not like you talk to anyone else, so they can't. Cassandra elbowed him hard in the ribs as Callum's face fell. Cal! What? Oh, sorry, Callum. It's fine, Callum replied, sending them an encouraging smile that he did not feel. The loss of his voice was something he felt every day. Just that morning, he had a question in his history of magic class, but hadn't been able to communicate it to the teacher. It wasn't like he could just throw a paper airplane with a note on it at the professor, and the only other people at the school that he had met so far who understood sign language were Lujane and Rayla. And it would take too much effort to try and track down an interpreter, especially an elven interpreter. Callum was having enough trouble with his sign language as it was. He could only use 4 fingers after all. He was just lucky that Rayla hadn't noticed anything else amiss. Heaven knows there was plenty. What classes do you have today? Cassandra asked him after the awkward silence. Mysticism and Divination, Callum replied, spelling out the word that he didn't know. It's the first time I've had it. The professor didn't even show up last week. Zal looked up suddenly as Rayla verbalized. Zal's head caught curiously at the words mysticism and divination. Who's the professor? She asked. Callum racked his brain for a moment, then spelled out the name Erebus. Everyone at the table suddenly shared some sort of look, as if they knew something he didn't. It wasn't that they looked worried, just perplexed. What? He asked them. What is it? It was Zal who spoke. Professor Erebus is a star-touched elf, she said, brow-furrowed, and he teaches a class about star magic. What's so strange about that? Creatures connected to star magic are incredibly rare, Rayla answered, frowning thoughtfully, and most elves take the class that align with their connected arcanum. There probably won't be too many kids in your class. Callum pondered that for a moment. From what he had heard about star magic, it was rather mystic, but a bit hard to grasp. It would certainly be interesting to meet a star-touched elf. He couldn't remember ever seeing one before, and wondered what they looked like. It would actually probably be a good thing that not many others would be in the class. It meant he would actually be able to write things down and communicate with this Erebus. I'm surprised he's still teaching, Cassandra commented. Usually, when a class doesn't have enough students, it's canceled. Yeah, I heard Erebus is brilliant, Zal added. I'm sure the college doesn't want to let him go. If anything, that only served to increase Callum's excitement for the class. Learning about magic was one of his favorite things in the world, and the chance to learn about something that was rare in the magical world made his pulse quicken. Rayla apparently noticed this, rolling her eyes. Nerd, she said with a small smirk. Rayla shouldered her pack and entered Blossom Hall with a sigh. Why was homework such an essential part of college? Xadia Academy was a magical university. Homework shouldn't be an issue. She climbed the stairs that led to the second floor dejectedly. Blossom Hall was 3 stories. The first floor held the common room, which no one ever used, as the bookshelves covered in dust indicated. The second floor was the girls' dorm, and the third belonged to the boys. She leaned against the railing of the steps as the books in her backpack threatened to tip her over. Seriously, college was a lot more tedious than she had originally thought it would be. Rayla groaned in disgust as her hand brushed something sticky on the railing. She wiped the goo off on her pants without thinking, then hesitated. She looked down at the railing only to find that there was an orange handprint there. Some sort of jelly, perhaps. The handprint seemed too small to belong to one of the college students. Oh, and it also had 5 fingers. Instinctively, Rayla reached for her back once more before she stopped herself. That was impossible. There was no way a human was at the university. It was about as likely as thunder himself swooping down from the sky. It had to be some sort of mistake. Perhaps the handprint had smudged in such a way as to create the illusion of another finger. But no. She looked up the railing and she found there were more jelly handprints, all of them with 5 fingers. That couldn't be a coincidence. Pulse juddering in her veins, Rayla followed the trail up the stairs, only to find the next set of steps had small handprints as well. Whoever this human was, they had gone all the way up to the 3rd floor. Why? She looked down the hallway, where her dorm room waited, then adjusted her backpack and followed the trail. When Callum walked into the classroom, he was a bit put off by the strangeness of the room. Considering he had grown used to Viren's office back home, that was saying quite a bit. The classroom was small, maybe only twice the size of his dorm room. Thick purple curtains covered the windows, completely masking any sunlight that might have filtered inside the chamber. The walls were painted black, only serving to add to the darkness of the room. Large shelves lined the back of the classroom, housing all sorts of strange items. Cheetos with purple crystals, glass bottles with strange purple worms crawling around, star charts, golden cups. Callum even saw a curved knife that looked like it might be ceremonial. There was a small black chalkboard hanging on the wall at the front of the room. Additionally, there was a small wooden writing desk, presumably belonging to this Erebos, to the left of the board. In front of that was a small row of about 3 smaller desks for students. There was a small door to the right, presumably a small closet. Callum was the first person to arrive. Not even the professor was there yet. Curious, he set his bag down on the first desk and walked to the shelves in the back. The items were even more strange up close. The worms crawled around inside the jar were a light purple in color, but seemed to have strange specks of light embedded in their skin, almost like stars. They even had small, dark purple mandibles that looked like they could pack quite a bite. The other items were plenty interesting as well. The star charts were detailed, so much so that Callum considered copying one down in his sketchbook so he could study it later. The golden cups that decorated the shelves had intricate carvings of elves and dragons. He couldn't be sure, but there even seemed to be humans depicted on one, though they seemed to be wielding dark magic, of course. He shivered and moved on to the other artifacts. Most curious of all was the centerpiece of the shelves. It was a small box, no longer than his forearm. It was made out of dark teak wood, with sturdy golden hinges and elaborate carvings of a wing on the cover. The lock was made out of thick, dark steel, and it looked to be very old. Callum could feel the magic radiating from it. There was something dark, something powerful about it, But there was also something else. A strange sort of warmth. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you," a deep voice suddenly said. Callum jumped and turned to find another figure in the room. "I," the elf said, stepping into the light, "am Erebus. You must be Callum." Rayla crept up the stairs carefully, wary of running into any humans. Granted, she had never met one. But after the stories that Rune had told her, she wasn't willing to confront one by herself. The tales of dark magic alone were enough to make her shudder. What would a human be doing at Xadia Academy? The war had ended 100 years ago, true. And it wasn't unheard of for humans to visit Xadia from time to time, and for elves to do the same. But the bias on both sides made that rather difficult, and as a result, no human had ever been admitted to Xadia Academy, and no elf had ever been admitted to Catalyst University. So what was a human doing here now? For the first time in 24 hours, Rayla found herself reaching for her swords. For the third time in 24 hours, Rayla found herself reaching for her swords. She growled in frustration when she realized that she couldn't have them with her. Not even for this. She received a few weird looks from some of the male elves wandering outside their rooms when she reached the 3rd floor. But she did her best to ignore them. The jelly handprints were more sporadic and more like jelly blobs now, but she was still able to follow them. Rayla passed through the first hallway of the boys' dorm, feeling significantly on edge. How had a human gotten this far into Blossom Hall without anyone noticing? Surely someone would have seen a human just wandering around campus. They weren't that easy to hide. As she reached a bend in the hallway, she uttered a soft curse as the jelly handprints disappeared entirely. Clearly, who was leaving the trail had run out of jam. Why were their hands even covered in jelly anyways? "Excuse me," Rayla said, catching the attention of a passing Moonshadow elf. "Have you seen anything strange recently?" The Moonshadow elf cocked his head at her. "You don't come up to the 3rd floor very often, do you?" She shook her head. Clearly she was female. Girls weren't usually allowed on the 3rd floor, especially past 8 in the evening, though she'd never seen or heard of anyone enforcing that idea. And she didn't particularly like the way the elf had said that. He leaned closer as if sharing some great secret. "They say," he said in a voice so hushed it was almost comical, "that room 313 is haunted." Rayla scoffed and rolled her eyes. "Please, there's no such thing as haunted." "Yes, there is," the boy insisted, "and it's been haunted for a while. Nobody even wants that room. The keys to that room always disappear without explanation." She huffed and stepped away from him, hoping he would get the message and give her some personal space. "I mean anything strange as in people. Real people, you know, like you." "Oh," the boy replied, no." Rayla thrusted her head back and groaned in exasperation. "Do you at least know what room is closest to this spot?" The Moonshadow elf thought for a moment. "This spot right here? Probably 311. Why?" Rayla walked past him without another word, too worried about the possible security implications to be polite. Was it possible? No, it couldn't be. That would be insane. As it turned out, room 311 was right around the corner. And sure enough, there was a bit of jelly on the handle. But there were no lights on under the door, so she assumed that no one was in the room at the moment. Great, Rayla thought, slumping against the wall across from the door. Now I wish I'd taken those lock-picking lessons a little bit more seriously. She had always been clinically awful at picking locks, preferring the use of force to the finesse in to finesse in a situation where she needed to get inside a room, or climbing in through a window. Rune had always told her that she hadn't had enough practice for the skill, and he'd been right. She knew her weaknesses. So what was she supposed to do? Bust down the door, in the middle of the hallway? It was entirely possible that the human wasn't even